This is Kenny Tan. Welcome to Real Estate License in 14 Weeks. We are at episode 10 of Starting from Zero, a series of online real estate preparation course that I prepare for you guys. If you like my content, I would appreciate you give me a thumbs up, and that will make me very, very happy. If you want to receive future notification of new releases from my videos, please remember to subscribe now and hit the bell. That way you receive first notification of all new releases. Previously, in the last episode, I talked about what are the legal requirements to have a valid deed. I think I gave you guys the 8 essentials. So next thing we're going to talk about is what are the things that are not necessary? In other words, what are the things that are non-essential to a valid deed? Number one, things that are non-essential to a valid deed is, does a deed have to be acknowledged? What does acknowledge mean? Acknowledge means be notarized. Now, normally when you present, you're in a transaction, you're a buyer. The escrow will prepare a deed intended for you. And in order for the deed to be recorded, the deed has to be notarized. But a deed does not need to be notarized to be a valid deed. Why does a deed then need to be recorded? Well, that's for the purpose of title insurance. In order to get title insurance, the deed would have to be a recorded deed in order to be insured. And that's the only reason why it needs to be acknowledged. But to have a valid deed, you don't need to have it acknowledged. Number two, non-essential of a valid deed is a valid deed does not need to be recorded. The third non-essential of a valid deed is, does the grantee have to be a competent grantee? Now, I previously gave you an example about a kid. You can actually grant a title to a property to a minor, somebody who has not attained the age of 18, such as that example I gave you about a man who wanted to grant title, who wanted to transfer property to his child. You don't need to have a competent grantee, but you just need a competent grantor. The fourth non-essential for a valid deed is, does it have to be dated? In other words, do you need to have a date on the deed? Well, it's non-essential. So if somebody prepares a deed that is not dated, all that means is that it is difficult to figure out when that deed was actually signed because it didn't have a date, but that does not make the deed an invalid deed. So dating is non-essential. Number 5, non-essential for a valid deed is what we call consideration. What is consideration? Consideration is something that you give up to receive something. For example, when you want to buy a piece of property, what is the consideration? Consideration is the money that you pay to the seller to get title to the property. That's what we call consideration. It could be money, it could be something that you give to the seller to receive the deed. It doesn't always have to be money. Consideration is something like, for example, if the seller owes you money and the seller may say to you, well, I owe you $500,000. How about I just give you the land in exchange for discharge of the debt? That means that if you receive the land, the seller no longer owes you that $500,000. So that's what we mean by consideration. But consideration is not an essential for a valid deed. For example, the example that I gave you previously about a man who wanted to take care of his mistress never paid anything to him. It is not required to have a valid deed. Number 6 non-essential for a valid deed is signature by the grantee. Signature is required on the deed to make it a valid deed from the grantor, but not from the grantee. So if somebody wants to give me a piece of property, for example, the example that I gave you, the mistress for the man need not put her signature on the deed in order to have a valid deed, because the signature of a grantee is non-essential. Number 7, a non-essential is legal description of the property. You know, we have just a general description like a property address. Even a street address is sufficient for have a valid deed, you don't need to have a legal description. A legal description is something that is prepared by a land surveyor. They will go to the property and pick out different points and draw lines so you have a legal description, which is non-essential to a valid deed. In order to have a valid deed, just the right description, whether a street address or some words that generally describe the property. And that's all that is required. Those are the factors that you don't need to have a valid deed. Next, we're going to talk about what are some of the things that will cause a deed to become an invalid deed. For example, previously I mentioned that you can't have a child, somebody who's a minor, be a grantor on the deed. If that happens, or for example, somebody who is not of sound mind, he is mentally ill. A person who is mentally ill, if he signs a deed, will make the deed not a valid deed because you need a competent grantor. The second thing that will make a deed invalid is that if you grant something, you could grant a piece of property to a grantee that does not exist, such as a dead person, something that doesn't exist. That means that the deed itself will be an invalid deed because you don't have a grantee that exists. Number 3, can you have a grantor sign a blank deed? A blank deed is such as a deed that has only the grantor's signature, but the rest of the information is missing, such as name of the grantee, property address. And whenever you have a grantee that does that, the process itself makes the deed an invalid deed. Number 4 situation. Sometimes I have come across situation where after the grantor has signed the deed, the escrow officer make changes to the deed without the grantor's signature. That will cause the deed to become invalid because it was done without the grantor's consent. Number 5, a forgery. How can a forgery happen? We all have the misconception that we don't have to worry about somebody stealing title to a property from us. For example, I've had cases where my client, the owner, didn't even know that somebody forged their signature. What does forging a signature mean? How could that happen? For example, if there's some crook out there that realize that this property is owned by somebody who's in China, so they take advantage of absentee owners. So what they did was they basically copy your signature, and then they colluded with a notary public who will notarize their signature and make some money off of that. As a result of that, that signature is actually a forgery. And then that document is recorded, and then the property is no longer under the owner's name. So that deed itself is a forgery. In order to get title back, the owner who is the victim of the forgery would have to go to court and do what we call a quiet title action to clear up the title to the property. And number 6 situation where a deed might be invalid. Sometimes, after a deed is prepared, somebody might go in and add something. For example, if the owner is only transferring one piece of property and not 2 pieces, and somebody added the second piece of property in the deed, that is called a material alteration, and that will make the deed not a valid deed. I've seen that happen before. So sometimes that happens during an escrow. Lastly, number 7, a deed that was never delivered, it's an undelivered deed, is not a valid deed. Like the situation I told you before where the man put the deed in the safe deposit box. It was never delivered. What is acknowledgement? Acknowledgement, when you see the word acknowledgement in the exam, you automatically think about notary public. Being acknowledged means that you sign your name in the presence of a notary public. When you go see a notary public, they will take your fingerprints. They will ask you to sign your name and put your fingerprints on their book, okay? And then they will take your driver's license, making sure that you're the person signing in. That's called acknowledgement. Recording. previously mentioned that recording is not essential to have a valid deed. But title company, in order to insure your property, they need to make sure that the deed is a recorded deed. Now, if you created 2 grant deeds to 2 different persons, transferring one property to 2 different persons, now that is not right. You could be sued for that. But as between the 2 people that got deeds from you, and if they both went to the county recorder to record the deed, now who winds up with the title to the property will depend on who recorded the deed first. Usually when you record a document, the county recorder will create what is known as a instrument number. Every instrument will have a number. And how do they determine who records first? They look at the instrument number. The smaller number, if the instrument has a smaller number, that means that that document was recorded first. So there is a saying that it's called first to record, first in right. Whoever that records first is the person who owns the title to the property. If you record second, you own nothing to the property. Now let's talk about the 2 types of deed. First kind of deed is called the grant deed. A grant deed has 2 types of warranties, or 2 warranties. Number 1 warranty means that if I give you a grant deed, I guarantee to you that I have not previously transferred the property to someone else. That's the first warranty. The second warranty in a grant deed is, if I give you a grant deed, I guarantee to you that other than all the liens and all the encumbrances I disclose to you, I do not have any encumbrances. Now, you will learn about encumbrances in chapter 3, but for now, treat encumbrances as liens against the property. Now, usually, once I give you the deed and I disclose to you what's on the deed, now if suddenly there is an undisclosed lien against the property, then I have to be responsible to you. I have to reimburse you. I have to compensate you for any encumbrances I did not disclose. So remember, there are only 2 warranties. I warrant that I have not transferred it to someone else, and I have disclosed all the encumbrances against the property. So that is the nature of a grant deed. Now let's talk about a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed is a deed that has no warranties absolutely. So what that means is that if I give you a quitclaim deed, I could give you good title, or you will end up with nothing because I did not have title to the property. So that is the difference. Quitclaim deed, no warranties. Next, I'm going to give you 2 different scenarios to illustrate all of the above principles that I just described to you. The first scenario is this. A man has 2 mistresses. And one evening, he decided that he wanted to visit both mistresses. Mistress 1 received a quitclaim deed. So in the early evening, he went to see his first mistress. He told his first mistress how much he loved her and he wanted to take care of her. So he gave her a quitclaim deed to a $5 million property. And then later in the evening, before he went to see the second mistress, he told the first mistress, please do not record this deed until I'm dead, because I don't want my wife to know that I gave away this $5 million property to you. So the mistress promised you, oh yeah, I promise you, I will not record it. And then he went to visit the second mistress at the later part of the evening. He gave a grant deed to the second mistress. And the second mistress made the same promise. I promise you, I will not record the deed. And look what happened. The next morning, both mistresses went to record their respective deeds. The second mistress recorded it before the first mistress. So now let's apply the principle. So because the second mistress recorded it first, who went up with the title to the property is the second mistress. Now, what about the first mistress? Can she sue the man? The answer is no, because the man gave him a quitclaim deed, not a grant deed. A quitclaim deed has no warranties, right? Okay, now, Let's go ahead and change the facts a little bit. It is not the second mistress that actually recorded first. It's the first mistress. So the first mistress who got the quitclaim deed recorded before the second mistress. Now, who winds up with the title? Of course, the first mistress. She recorded first. Now, what about the second mistress? She recorded second. Can she sue the man? Well, technically, the man gave her a grant deed. So grant deed means is that he warranted to the second mistress that he had not transferred the deed to anyone else. But the truth is, before he met the second mistress in the later part of the evening, he actually transferred the property to the first mistress. So the second mistress were to sue him, he would be liable to the second mistress because of the grant deed that was given. So that's just an interesting scenarios I wanted to share with you, just to show you how these principles are to be applied. So that's it. This is the end of episode 10. Well, I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.